so I get to be the numbers guy. I know everyone's peeked ahead and looked at the results, but obviously one of the biggest questions has been, how did we come up with the transfer price? So just to review, the negotiated transfer price is $57.5 million, with $54 million due at closing, which would be financed by a revenue bond, and then another $3.5 million due 5 years after closing. So obviously when we say negotiated transfer price, there was obviously a lot of thought that went into what is this number and what does it represent. DUA started at zero. The county started north of $100 million, and ultimately, one of the main arguments is that all the communities feel like we've already paid for this. Why do we have to pay again? And the county feels like, well, we do have an investment in this, and we really own it. And one of the things we mentioned earlier was the fact that county employees have been running this system, and Wayne County's pension system and retiree healthcare system is severely underfunded. And so they feel like at a minimum they should be getting some compensation for those pensions, because as part of this deal, DUA would walk away from all legacy costs for Wayne County employees. So DUA would not have any employees. Veolia would be a contract employee. We'd pay them once a month or whatever it is, and that's it. So we'd have no legacy costs, employees, anything like that. So part of this transfer price is for covering those unfunded legacy costs that we're going to be walking away from. The other thing that comes along with this deal is there is existing debt currently in the system. There's about $68 million of existing revenue bonds. So these are bonds that are currently outstanding that you're already paying for. They're included in your rates, and that debt would be sort of refinanced and put in DUA's name, and you'll continue to pay for that as you always have. In addition to that, there's about $33 million of judgment levy debt that actually is going to stay at the county, because for the communities who have a judgment levy, that's on your taxes, and because of the way that works legally, it has to stay at the county level, but you'll continue to pay it the same way you do today. The other thing that comes along, I'll get into the details of this, is Vito mentioned this earlier, but there's about $38 million in reserves, basically cash that the system has for future capital and things like that, that will be coming over as part of the transaction as well. So although we're getting the debt and paying the $57.5 million, we are getting the operating cash of the system.
But the operating cost of the system basically is something we paid into already. They couldn't be spent any other place anyway if they weren't spending it every year.
Exactly right. So that's why there is...
It's nothing more than our money sitting there.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it is our money. This is funds that have been... You could essentially say if you were breaking even every year, you'd have no reserves. But obviously you can't do that because you got to have money for emergencies. So you're right. You're getting your overpayments or reserves back as part of this deal.
Okay. Councilman Chairman?
Yes.
The other question I would have, the issue of $54 million paid at closing. Now, we already have a bond that the taxpayer's paying on already, correct? Basically a bond that you said that we owe, what, $62 million less on?
So there's a bunch of debt, but yes, there's revenue bonds that are being paid for in your rates in the system.
So
yes.
We're going to add another bond to pay for the $54 million down payment. What's the issue with why such a large down payment?
Well, it's really not a down payment. It's really the payment with the additional 3.5 due in 5 years.
But we're still going to have to bond that.
Right, we're going to bond
taxpayers to pay for that now.
Well, right, and it's not going to be it's going to be a revenue bond, which means it's going to be paid for by the system through rates. So not through taxes, through the sewer rates.
So if I could just address that just real quick, the city of Taylor per se, because we have a fund balance of that's in the sewer account, we'll use as much of that fund balance as possible to relieve or minimize the amount that we actually bond for. So our bond will be far less, the amount we're bonding for will likely be far less than other communities.
Do we have any idea at this point, like what kind of rate charge we're going to be looking at per household? I mean,
well, and maybe this would be helpful, and let me make sure and stress this too. So there will be no, Taylor will not specifically have a distinct portion of that $54 million bond. So it will be spread across the system based on the flows. So the communities that use more of the system will pay more of the debt service payment. But it's going to be based on...
Yeah, we'll pay more.
We're like 18%, I think.
Right, you're about 18% of the system. So if some smaller communities had more flow, they'd get more of the debt service payment. And maybe this next slide will kind of help explain this a little bit. So as we mentioned earlier, this is a self-sustaining fund, meaning the only way it gets money is by charging wastewater to all the customers, which
Oh,
is
okay, so
essentially the
the rate
13
increase.
communities. So we're gonna, and then all the money that goes in there can only be used for this system. So as we look at, what does this mean financially, because obviously one of the biggest concerns is what does this mean to residents? And so, as we went through and did some modeling, so Dick Hinchon, who's been very involved with the system, and Beth Bailey from Plant Moran, who's also been very involved, they've done the projections on what do we think this is going to mean for the rates. And we believe, based on the projections, that it's going to be rate neutral, which basically means we don't believe there's going to be any spikes. Because we believe the efficiencies we'll gain in operating the system by hiring Veolia and not having the county kind of run it and put administrative fees in there and other, overhead costs. The reductions that we'll see in the operating costs will offset the debt service payment that we're going to pick up. So as a little perspective, over the last 10 years, the increases in the rates from the county have been anywhere from, we'll say, just north of 0 to 5.5%. The projections that we've prepared, we show over the next 5 years rate increases from 1.4 to 6%. So again, when we say rate neutral, we're not saying they're going to be 0% increases, but there's going to be no big spikes that are going to be significant, in any one year. And ultimately, once we think we get the system running, we think, there's a lot of operational efficiencies that will be gained that will help keep the rates down. And as we mentioned earlier, I think the toughest part for everyone to understand is there's a lot of what if this happens, what if that happens, but ultimately, because this is an enterprise fund for DUA and for the county, you're paying for it anyways. And so really what you're paying for is the ability to make the decisions to say, we want to hire this contract, we want to fix this pipe, we want to do this and that. Whereas now what happens is the county does that, you may have input on that, but ultimately it's the county's decision to fix things, hire people, do all that. Under this agreement, the DUA board, which all 13 communities have a representative, will be the ones making the decisions, awarding contracts, doing all that. From a straight dollar perspective, you're going to pay it you're going to pay it anyways. I mean, the system has always paid 100% of all the costs, and that's going to continue. And really what this allows you the ability to do is have a seat at the table, make a decision, who do you want to hire, what do you want to fix.
And cut out some of the Wayne County administrative costs.
Councilman Reserve.
Could you explain the 30 or 35 million in debt that the county is holding on to? Why is that going to stay there, and who's ultimately responsible for that?
Sure. I'm not sure if Taylor, does Taylor, you have a judgment levy?
We do.
Okay. So, judgment levy basically says you were sued, and so Judge Fikens back in the 90s said you're going to do this $250 million worth of improvements, and they figured out who was going to pay for it. And as part of that, all the communities that were involved have a millage on their taxes. That millage is collected, sent to the county to pay for this judgment levy debt. So because that's a legally binding agreement, if we were to try and take over that debt and put it into DUA, it would lose that judgment levy status, and you could no longer levy for it, which means you'd have to put it into the rate and pay for it. And so because that's been around for 20-some years now, legally it just made sense to leave it there, and you'll continue normal, put it on the tax levy, send it to the county, they'll pay it.
There's another caveat to that too. That during the judgment levy, the judge allowed the communities to put it on property tax and not as rates. And if we would have refinanced those, we're not so sure that the judge, we would have to go in front of another federal judge to allow us to assess it to property taxes instead of putting on rates. So you got people who have vacant lots, churches and schools that are, I think they're still paying their fair portion of that levy, because it goes onto the property and not onto the use of your sewer. Right. And that's one of the reasons why the county has to keep, because we weren't so sure that another federal judge will allow us to tax properties instead of using
So
sewer.
there's literally no skin in the game for the county.
And I argue
You're saying there isn't any right now?
there isn't any
and
now.
There isn't any going forward?
Correct.
How the hell did they stay so clean after all this time?
Don't ask me.
So I will say there was one piece that they, when the airport was part of the county, as part of the county, that was paid for out of general fund of the county, their assessment. They have capacity and So there was a piece that they had at one time. Once it became an authority, that's the authorities.
Do you know, at the high point, in terms of employees at the plant, what that number it was compared to what it is today?
So it was about 120 total employees that were at the treatment plant, and that includes the industrial pretreatment. And with Veolia's projection, they're projecting for it to be down at about 48.
Was that before camp, the 120?
Before the camp project
Okay.
of that optimization.
That
After the
was the highlight of
optimization, yeah, after the optimization, it dropped to mid-60s, and it's been slowly declining. It's actually less than the 48 right now because they have a bunch of vacancies. They just haven't been able to hold employees at the plant because they know this transfer is coming, so people have left for other opportunities.